Welcome to another episode of my Wake Up Call. This is the podcast where I get to know my guests a little bit, and then I want to get to know them much more when they're on the podcast. Vitaliy Katsenelson is kind of unique amongst my guests in that we recorded a previous episode, and he said, "Mark, I'm going to send you my book, and you're going to read it." I mean, he sounded like my wife. You're going to do this, Mark. And if you're listening in, you need to read his book, Soul in the Game. And you're going to find out from the conversation. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He was born in Murmansk, Soviet Union, immigrated to the United States with his family in 1991. After joining Denver-based value investment firm IMA in 1997, he went on to become the chief investment officer in 2007 and CEO in 2012. He's written 2 books on investing, and he's an award-winning writer, and he's known for his uncommon common sense. And you got to get the book, Soul in the Game, because it just overflows with uncommon common sense. Forbes magazine called him the new Benjamin Graham. He's written for publications everywhere, Financial Times, Barron's, Institutional Investor, and Foreign Policy, and articles are also on his website, Contrarian Edge, and also in audio format on his podcast, Intellectual Investor. He lives in Denver with his wife and 3 kids. He loves to read, listen to classical music, play chess, write about life, and does he ever? And he joins us. And you got to get the book because, when PR companies approach me, say, "Will you have our client?" I say, my listeners are listening for someone they can believe in, root for, and fall in love with. And so some of the PR company says, "Well, that's going to eliminate about 2 or 3 of the people we're sending you, but we got a couple." And Vitaliy is he fits all of those. He's not going to abandon his financial practice because he's just so good at it, and the return that he gets is really astonishing. But I hope he continues. The Soul in the Game is just the beginning of more books in that area, because he put his heart and soul into this. He shared with me that he actually wrote it as something to give to his children, and I can understand why. I got to tell you an anecdote, and then I'm going to let you talk, Vitaliy. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
So my listeners know this. You probably don't know this. I dropped out of medical school twice and finished. I probably had untreated depression. And the day that I graduated, I started writing a journal. And I wasn't a writer. I was finally a graduated doctor. And my first journal, and I didn't know I would become a writer. The first thing I wrote is, "I can't believe I made it through. They have graduated a crazy person." And I'm on volume 256, 45,000 pages later. And it's interesting. I have 3 grown children. And my oldest child, who's really feisty, she said, "Dad, if you die and we do a garage sale and we try to sell your journals, we could only get 25 cents a piece for them because they're used." And here's the funny thing. She's 40. I love the heck out of her. She would say the same thing now. But talk to us, Vitaliy, in any way you want to take this. As I said, I'd be curious about, and my listeners would be, about this journey. I wouldn't say you've left, financial advising, because you're just so good at it. But how and why this book came to be?
Well, thank you for a very kind introduction, Mark. It's very kind of you. Well, as you mentioned, I did write this book for my kids, and what gives it away is that in the very beginning of the book, I dedicate the book to my kids. I say to Jonah, Hannah, me, and Sarah, because you don't read my emails, which is probably, which is that's it's right there. And which is probably true for almost all parents, right? You read something interesting, you read something interesting, you forward to your kids, and they say, "Oh, it's another email from my father or my mom." Well, in this case, I write this article, and I send it to them, and I would be lying if I told you that they read every single one of them. They don't. So this was my way of downloading my wisdom into a format that I can guilt them into reading, I guess. That's uh, but so that was that was one of the reasons why I wrote it. But another reason was, as you mentioned, I run an investment firm, and I do write investment articles too. But over time, as I've been writing investment articles, I started to write more and more about topics that were unrelated to stock market or economy. I started to write about life. And during the pandemic, I was writing this essay about Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. And I also love classical music, as you mentioned. So I was writing this essay about him, and I was writing about his one of his pieces for violin. And as I was reading more and more about this piece, I realized when Tchaikovsky was composing this music, he went through an incredible struggle. And it was a little bit eye-opening for me, because when you listen to this music, it's so wonderful, so light. But what you don't see is the struggle that went into it. And I could relate to that as a writer. If you read this book and you feel like it's flowing, if it's flowing, it talks to you, it's because I spent 50 times rewriting every sentence, okay? Agonizing, being frustrated. And so what I did, I ended up, as I was writing about Tchaikovsky, I ended up writing this essay about how Tchaikovsky's struggles are so similar to struggle you have in any creative activity, being composing music or writing, etc. And when I finished that essay, I realized, oh my God, actually over the last 10, 15 years, I wrote so many essays like that will be lost in the on my website. So unless I put them into a book, and if people read them, it could actually help them. I'm supposed to be a capitalistic pig, and I am, but writing this book was really kind of an altruistic, what the impetus was really altruistic, because this is not after you read this book, this is not a marketing book. I'm not trying to promote my firm or myself. This was really my way to be kind of a net positive for society. So that's why I wrote the book.
It's interesting that you say that. I'll share one of my guests on the show was Jason. I think his name is Jason Pfeiffer. I could be. He's the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And what he talked about is, he would have a little editorial control at the beginning, and he would talk about who is in the issue. And he said nobody cared. Mm-hmm. And then he started writing personal things, and he said, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm a journalist, but I know something about the struggles. I know something about the failures and the ups and downs. And he started writing about that. And he started getting more and more traction from the entrepreneurial community. Mm-hmm. And now you might say, well, the entrepreneurs might be a little bit more creative than the financial community, but it's a roundabout way of saying that, I really hope you put energy into this as well as your financial writing, because I think there's a hunger, and you can tell me because you said capitalistic pig, but I think there is a hunger for people being able to read something and relate to it and feel, oh, he's not selling me, he's not pushing me, he's not maneuvering me. So, but yeah, I just hope that you'll be able to talk about this to the financial community. and see who it attracts.
So so I started writing in 2004 for the street.com, and the street.com at the time was kind of a kind of pioneering website, because like when you look at normal traditional financial websites or publications, they would have professional journalists write for them. The street.com basically kind of put it upside down, and they hired professional money managers to talk about stocks. And so when they hired me to write, they were paid absolutely nothing, and they were overpaying me, because even though I had the master's degree in finance and CFA designation, etc., I knew very little about writing. And in the beginning, my writing was incredibly proper, and it was incredibly boring. And if like I went back and read some of those articles, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I wrote them, because they put you to sleep. In fact, I would argue that they are terrific, soporific. So if you just read them before you go to sleep, you knock you out. Now, then something happened to me, which this little thing happened to me, which changed the way I write completely. And here's the story. So this is maybe 6 months later, 2005. I bought this device, TiVo, and I had some issues with that, and I called technical support. This is almost 20 years ago, and at the time, the systems that recognize your voice when you talk to them were very like in the infancy. As you can tell, I have an accent. So when I was talking to the auto attendant and tried to understand my accent, it didn't. So I was struggling with that. And then at the time, my son Jonah was 4 years old. He was sitting on the floor playing with the truck. And what I did, I gave him the phone, and I would tell him what to say, and he would repeat it back into the phone with his beautiful Disney accent. And so and then that's how I was able to to get where I wanted to get. Now, so then I wrote about it, and after I wrote about this, it ended up being a very short article where I told this story, like just the way I told you right now, and it was very personal. I was a little bit vulnerable, because I basically had to admit that I do have an accent that could be difficult to understand me, and basically what happened, I received more response from readers to this article, which didn't have the great insight. It was just kind of a funny anecdote than any other article I wrote before. In fact, I would argue I received more response for it than all the other articles combined. And I realized it's okay to be yourself. It's okay to be vulnerable. Humor is important, and being authentic is important. And that changed the way I write. So that and also what I found is that the storytelling is incredibly important as a writer. And let me give you this anecdote. And let me tell you a story. So I was about to start working on my first book, and I had a friend of mine who has of German descent. Gave me his writing. At that point, he published the book, and he said, "Vitaliy, just make sure you don't have any extra words in it." He was like, he wanted the book to be very efficient. And so I decided, bought his book and started to read it. And his book was incredibly efficient. In fact, I would argue, it read like a Mercedes-Benz instruction manual. And I can tell you, and I do this for a living, I could not finish more than a chapter, because it was extremely efficient. It was extremely boring. And if you think about storytelling, if you look from the number of words that it takes you to get to the point, is the least efficient way to communicate. But at the same time, that is so important for us humans, because storytelling, we basically relate to life through storytelling. So this storytelling kind of got weaved into my financial writing as well. The only reason I have so many email subscribers, so many people read my articles, because I write in a way that they can relate to. I write to them as a one human being to another, not as a financial drone to try to communicate to masses.
So can I give you a little insight behind that, a little
Yeah, absolutely.
neuropsychological insight?
Please.
Uh, this is when I coach people, uh, especially techies, I'll say you need to toggle between talking to and with people
Hmm.
and away from talking over and at them.
Hmm.
Because when you talk over and at them, as in these boring manuals, you take away their freedom to engage with you because they feel like you're forcing them to engage with you. But when you talk to and with them, which a story does, they have the freedom to say, oh, I like this. I want to hear more.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
also, one of the powers of storytelling is when you can tell a story that you are emotionally connected to.
Hmm. You're
The,
absolutely right.
the audience lowers their guard because they don't feel like you're going to do a bait and switch and sell them. Now, I know some people who can tell stories, but it's all bait and switch. You can tell it sounds emotional, but there is an ulterior motive,
Hmm.
which is to maneuver you into doing something. And look, I don't fault them. That's the business community, and everybody has to make a living. But I just wanted to share that with you because I think what you're discovering, I just added some neuropsychology to it, is
Hmm.
that you're leaning towards talking to and with people and away from over and at them. And people are engaging with you because they feel like you're talking to and with them.
Mark, let me read you one line. So this one line in the book. It's by so there's a so I have a part of the checks part of the section part of the book talks about Stoic philosophy.
Mm.
And in introduction, I quote the founder of the founder of Stoic philosophy, Zeno, and this is I need to put my glasses on. It's a very short sentence, but this is exactly what. So I approached this book the same way Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, approached his students. Zeno did not claim to be a physician. He saw himself as a patient, describing the progress of his treatment to fellow patients in the hospital beds beside him. So this is basic. Grab the bed next to mine and let's have a conversation about life, creativity, Stoic philosophy, classical music, and other topics. That is how I think the right way to communicate is, not, as you said, not to talk down to people, but just sharing stories. And also, one thing I learned is that, first of all, I'm a financial guy. Who am I to dispense wisdom about parenting, or like, at least if you did this, at least you have a medical degrees. I don't, parenting, or I can't play an instrument. Who am I to talk about classical music? So understanding the fact that I'm not an expert. I'm a person who has read a lot about this. I'm a person who thought a lot about this, but knowing at the same time that I am not a final authority on any of the topics I discussed. But this, actually brings some humility to the conversation. And I'm very happy to change on my mind on anything I wrote.
I think
Uh,
I differ with you. I think you are an expert. I think because I'll share an anecdote with you.
mhm.
A friend of mine is someone named Nolan Bushnell. He founded Atari, Chuck E. Cheese. He was Steve Jobs' first boss. And he's a character from Silicon Valley,
Mhm.
charming. Uh, the key to his success is he's incredibly curious about everything.
Mhm.
He has 8 children from a few marriages, and he gave me the best parenting advice, which it's too late for me to follow with my grown children, but I'm hoping they can do it with my grandchildren, or 4 of them who are 4 and under. And I'll try and imitate his voice. He would say, you know, I graduated 247th in my class of 247. So either I was stupid or I was a little distracted. And I told my kids, grades don't matter. Grades don't matter. Now, try not to flunk out if I'm paying for it because I could get a little bit ticked off, but they really don't matter. What really matters, and it's the only thing that matters, is what did you learn today that could be turned into an action and what was the result? and don't expect the result to be good. The Atari, when we first started designing it, was a piece of junk. So don't expect, you'd like to get an A, but it really doesn't matter. And then here's the advice that I wish I'd followed. And if you're listening in and you have young children, I thought it was brilliant. Now, he's not an expert on parenting, but like Vitaliy, he's an expert because of how much he cares about his family. And he said, if you ask your kids, how was school? What'd you learn? They don't like the question because you're not even curious. You're using it to connect with them, and you don't know a better way to connect with them. And they've been asked hundreds of questions all day long. So when you say that and you're not even emotionally connected to their answer, they respond the same way. Fine, nothing new. And so what he would do every night with all these kids for dinner, he'd say to each of them, teach me one thing you learned today.
Love it.
Not what did you learn, but teach me.
Mm-hmm.
And because he's curious about everything, he says, when you bathe your children in sincere beginner's mind curiosity, they get excited. They want to teach you what they learned. And when they can teach it to you, they own it. And as he said, what's really important is, did you convert it into an action? And what was the result? And it'll get better with time. Mm-hmm. And the other piece of advice, which I didn't follow, because I think my children were a little bit focused on the grades, and they, went to nice colleges, but they're not as curious as I would have liked them to be. They're wonderful. I'm blessed. They're functional, but their focus is, work to live. Don't live to work. And now, trust me, they're very curious because they love their children. They adore their children. So I'm the oddball in my family because I'm so curious. And the other thing that he did, if you're listening in, he said, I would take each child, I would alternate on Sunday, and I would take a different child to a different place to eat. And it would have to be at least 45 minutes away each way. He said, because then you're stuck with each other. And we would go to a place that neither of us had eaten before, and then we'd both be curious. He said, I took one of my daughters, and we're eating, and she looks at me and she says, Dad, everybody looks angry. And I looked at her and I said, we're in a fishing village. I think they just got off the boat. Mm-hmm. And I thought, boy, I wish I'd known that. So I'm just sharing that, but I don't want to take over this interview. But I thought it was just great advice.
I think those are terrific insights. I remember I listened to a podcast where Tim Ferriss interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he said, Neil deGrasse Tyson said something really stuck with me. He said, I was never an A student. I was a B+ or A- student. And he said, I could have been an A student, but the problem is I also like photography. I had other hobbies. So if I wanted to get those A's, I would have to give something else up. And I think that actually speaks about a balance. In this case, getting that extra, like if we go from B+ to A, is it really worth it if you give up something you're really curious about? Something, so I agree with you 100%. And I also can relate to when my daughter Hannah and I, she was at the time 15 or 16, we would drive together to she would play chess. Oh, actually, even better than this, we go skiing all the time. And skiing, I live in Denver, and skiing about 2 hours away. The best part of skiing is the drive. Because for 2 hours, each way, we spend in the car and talking. And same thing when we every year we go to Santa Fe Opera. It's an 8-hour drive. And again, you would it's actually what you think would be a bug, driving for 8 hours. That's actually the feature of the whole trip. So absolutely, spending time with your kids where they have to talk to you, where you have to find conversations. Even listen to podcasts. I mean, we do this all the time. It's wonderful. One thing I realized, and this was a very interesting insight. when your kids are young, you think you have forever with them. Okay. But if you look, if there's Tim Urban wrote this wonderful article where he basically figured out that by the time after by the time your kids leave your house, you spend 95% of the time with them that you're ever going to spend. I wanted to think about it. In other words, until they live with you, that time you spend with them, that's the most time you're ever going to spend with them. Because when they go to college, or when they get married or whatever, get a job, you're lucky to see them 15 minutes a week or an hour a week. So when I realized, so that was a very important realization for me, because, and I'll give you an example. My daughter Hannah, she's going to be senior next year in high school. So I only get to drive her to high school 200 more times, 250 times more. That's it. And that will, so in the past, I looked at driving kids to school as a chore. Today, I look at it as a privilege. Today, I actually look forward to driving them to school, because in the back of my mind, there was a counter. Okay, I have one less time to drive them. And this is to your point, but when I'm with them in a car, I'm fully present. I am, I'm not on the phone. I'm not talking to somebody else on the phone. If we are listening to music, we are talking. And I think that's extremely important for me.
I want to share something with you that I hope parents who are listening in, especially parents who have young children. When my children were young, they're 40, 37, 33 now. You could get my full attention in my therapy office if you were a patient. But I was busy making a living, and my kids' nickname for me was "Hi kids, bye kids, love you kids." It wasn't funny. I mean, you laugh at it. Hi kids, bye kids, love you kids. And something that I'm doing with my grandchildren, and I wasn't geographically close to my grandparents, and I hope if you're listening in, and I hope this lands well for you, Vitaliy. Mm-hmm. I race home I'm 75. I race home when my 4 grandchildren, 4 and under, are going to come over. Mm-hmm. And my wife gets all the credit. My family's a little bit tightly wound, but they have each other's backs. They root for each other. They help each other. They're working. They're launched. My wife gets most of the credit for that. And so, but I'll race home, and there will be my wife and my 2 daughters and my 4 grandchildren in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And I race home, and when I sit there, I am completely ignored. I mean, nobody looks at me, nobody speaks to me, nobody asks me anything. And if I was my grumpy father, who died many years ago, I might have said, well, I'm not being included. I'll just go upstairs and check my email. But I realized that they feel my presence. And here's an interesting thing. They'll be checking their emails. They'll be multitasking. The kids are working on, the grandkids are working on something. But if I look at my phone for a second, even though they've ignored me the whole time, they will all look at me with the stink eye. Like, what are you looking at your phone for? And so here's the progress I've made. And I don't want to take too much time, but I hope you'll like the story. And so I thought, okay, I'm not going to look at my phone when I'm with them. And then inside, I'm thinking, oh, I wonder if I have messages. I wonder if there's any texts that I should respond to. And then I thought to myself, even though they're ignoring me and I'm not looking at my phone, that's still crappy of me. And so then the next step was, because I'm not going to have forever to see my grandchildren like this, but to your point, and they're going to grow up so quickly. So here's something that I'm doing, and I'm recommending it to all parents, even, your teenagers, even practice with your wife. occasionally, even though my wife and daughters will not look at me the entire time, my grandchildren will be playing and they'll look at me.
Mm.
And I sit there waiting for them to look at me.
Mm-hmm.
When they look at me, I bathe them in complete delight and love.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing on my mind other than complete delight and love. And I am so lucky that you're in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what happens is it's so pure and loving and patient and present, they take a second look. They'll be playing, but then when they look at my eyes, they'll look at me another time. And my daughters will say, "Oh, you're going to do that Google eye thing that you do with my kids?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, every time I do it, and I put any agenda, any ego, any where's my emails aside, it's the best feeling because I am just there giving them as much love and delight as I can because I know the world's going to squeeze it out of them.
Mm.
So I'm sharing that with you because it's a good thing that my wife never reads anything I do or doesn't listen to my podcasts. So I'm now bathing my wife in utter delight. If she wants my attention, I'm in the middle of something. Instead of putting the phone down and going,
Mm.
I look at her with the eyes that say, "You've put up with me for 45 years, and I get to have a family, and my kids are doing well, and they like each other. You get all the credit. You gave me a family, and I'm a weirdo." And so I'm looking at her with total appreciation. She wants my attention, and I don't go,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's registering. I mean, I can't tell for sure, but I'm starting to see a little smile in her eyes.
It took 45 years.
Well, only 45 years. But I'm sharing it with you because I'm telling you, if you let go of anything, and even with your wife, if you just look at her with utter delight, that you have no idea how appreciative I am that you're in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different vibe.
I think you're right.
Yeah. So enough. I'm going to shut up for the rest of the podcast, but because my listeners are already saying, "Will you let the guy talk, Mark? He's got this great book, and you haven't shut up." So tell us more about the soul in the game and talk a little bit about your soul.
Uh, well, let's talk about what soul in a game means. How's that? Let's start with that.
Let's start with that.
So after the book came out, I was on the podcast and somebody says, how can you describe soul in a game in a bumper sticker? And I thought about it, realized that bumper sticker is too much. I just need a license plate. And you just have two words. I care.
Mm.
That's what, when you have soul in a game, that's all it is. You care. And there's a soul in a game is an attitude, how you approach life, how approach different activities. If you have soul in the game and you run an investment business, first of all, you need to have a skin in the game. In other words, if I'm buying stocks for my clients, I should probably own the same stocks my clients do. Okay. So if I'm not just enjoying the upside of having those clients and collecting fees, but also I would suffer if at the faults of my decisions, So that's just having skin in the game. But if you think about having soul in the game, also means that I would not do the monetary is a secondary. So when you have soul in the game, monetary are secondary considerations. So if I had $1 billion and I didn't have to come to work, and actually I don't need $1 billion, but if I basically did not if I did not if I didn't have to work, I would be doing the same thing because I absolutely love what I'm doing. So also I would not do anything. I'm just using myself as an example, but that's hopefully listeners can see through that. I would not do anything to that will hurt my clients for my benefit. Again, that's having soul in the game. So if you have soul in the game, and you do something meaningful, something that's important to you, you're more likely to have a good life. And that's kind of the point of the book. One of the points in the book, I guess. So that's what soul in the game means to me.
I love that. As you said, I care. I'm also thinking of two words: you matter. Because when you say I care, what you're really saying is that whoever you're with matters to you.
Yes.
And
no, I think you're absolutely right? Because the one thing that's important, like I'll give you this, I'll tell you the story. My 16-year-old, now 17, then 16-year-old daughter Hannah was going to teach chess to 8-year-old girl, and Hannah wanted to do this just for one reason. She wanted to have pocket money. There was no altruism there. It was unadulterated greed for money. She wanted money so she can buy herself lunch at school. She can go to lunch with her friends. And before her first lesson, I asked her, "Did you prepare for the lesson?" She said, "Well, I kind of know what I'm going to do." I said, "Just realize what responsibility you have. In front of you, you have a way to influence if this girl is going to love chess for the rest of her life or she won't. By you having soul in the game, by you caring about this girl, by you will be able to change the course of the girl's future." And that actually had a huge impact on Hannah, because she actually started to prepare to her chess lessons. So that's that girl mattered.
So, how did she prepare? Because you mean she actually thought ahead of time what she wanted to cover in the lesson,
Yes,
as opposed to just winging it. So she had an intention and a plan, because she didn't want to shortchange whoever she was teaching.
No, that's exactly right. She prepared for the lesson. That's exactly right. Yes.
If you're listening in, I think there's a great lesson in everything that Vitaly's said. I want to emphasize what he just said. I think people can pick up when you've prepared. He said to me, "I'm sending you the book. Please read it." And a lot of times, because it's just my schedule and whatever, I get a press kit, and I don't have time to read books. But I read his. I'll tell you, I didn't read it cover to cover, but I will. And if you're listening in, it's not that often that I read a lot of my guest books.
Mike, what was your favorite chapter from what you read so far?
Well, the introduction, I could just see you growing up, and then your father becoming an artist, and what an inspiration he was, and just a Renaissance person, your father who just keeps learning, and it just that was amazing. I was very touched by what happened with your mom. Then when you went into soul in the game, it really challenged me to think, do I have soul in the game? And then I started reading some of the short chapters, and the chapters range in length from as little as a page to several pages. And so I can't rattle them off, but when you were talking about each of your children, and you talked about Hannah and the chess, and they're going to love this book. I hope they read it before you die.
No, the oldest two read it. The Hannah and my son Jonah, 17, 21, they read it already. And my 9-year-old, she listened, because it's available on Audible as well. She listened to sub chapters of it, not the whole thing yet, but hopefully when she gets older, she'll listen. She reads the whole book. Yeah.
I want to share a parenting anecdote. Another one I just thought of. Up until I had children, I looked at myself as a coward. I was responsible, but I stayed out of my comfort zone. I stayed in my comfort zone. One of the things I was really uncomfortable about, and I won't go into my background, but speaking in front of people was too intimidating. So I'm not sure I spoke in front of people. Going to med school, you have to speak in front of a little group, but it was something that I would just avoid. I wouldn't even raise my hand a lot because I came from somewhat of a critical background. And if you raised your hand, it could be seen as disrespectful. So that was my mindset. And I was strolling my now 40-year-old when she was 6 months old. And tell me if you've had this experience, especially with your first child. And I was strolling her and I looked into her eyes, and it was like looking into the eyes of God. She looked up at me, and what she was saying to me is, when I get to be 18, be someone I'm proud of. Don't be someone I'm embarrassed about. And she's looking in my eyes to change her diaper. I don't know what she's looking for. But when I saw her looking at me that way, I realized she wouldn't be proud of me because I wasn't proud of me. So everything I'd said no to get out of things, I started saying yes to everything. And so I started speaking in front of little groups, little old nursing homes where if you just showed up, they were happy. And then, and I've kind of created a monster because, I've trained hostage negotiators. I was in the O.J. Simpson trial. I spoke in Moscow with Daniel Kahneman. We were featured speakers. And so people will say, would you do this? So I have a habit of saying yes. And then afterwards I say, what did I get myself into? And then I get nervous, but then I do it. And I think maybe it's because I'm still a coward inside, but I push myself because I don't want to give into that part of me. And I think if you love your children, especially if you're a male, it's really important. I think more important to men than women. For me, it is that my children are proud of me. I don't want them to be embarrassed. I don't want them to discover something like, I interviewed someone recently, the top coach in the world. She founded the Institute of Coaching at Harvard Medical School. Carol Kaufman, she and her partner have a great new book out called Real-Time Leadership. And I asked her about her origin story. And she said, well, my dad was really successful, but it turned out he was a sociopath. God. He got people into Ponzi schemes, and he thought, that's the way the world works. And he wanted me to sort of become part of that. And I said, Dad, he wasn't mean to me, but I said, Dad, I don't think I can do that. It's dishonest. And so I think she still loved him around that, but I think it made it difficult for her to be proud of him.
I think you love somebody not for something, but despite something. So, but the couple things. I think what I found that the kids don't just pay attention to what you say, they pay attention to what you do. So once you realize that changes your behavior tremendously, because you realize you should become a person, you should behave as a person you want him to be as well. So saying, don't run streetlights when you drive, and then you're running them all the time, probably not the right thing to do. That's point number one. Point number two, and I think anybody, on a slightly different point, anybody who has progressed in life went through life with an imposter syndrome. Like I feel like I went through my life, so far with a fake it till you make it attitude. And what I mean by this is that I started writing in 2004. In 2005, maybe 8 months after I started writing for TheStreet.com, I started writing for Financial Times. Financial Times is probably one of the most respected newspapers in the world, financial newspapers in the world. And I've been writing for only 8 months, and I had the audacity to submit articles to Financial Times, and they took it. And because I behaved as I've deserved to be there, even though I didn't yet. So I think the going through life, having seen yourself as you're, always seeing a better version of you, and that's what kids do to you, actually ends up elevating you. And you end up at some point, you start deserving of the person you think you are. And I think that has been incredibly important for me. And I would agree with you 100%. Two things I would argue that really changed me as an individual: kids and writing. Kids both made me a lot more introspective. Both of them made me think a lot more about subjects I never thought about before. So, those are my thoughts on that. Yeah.
So I'm going to give you something that maybe you'll think about, but it's more for my listeners, because I think you're going to be fine with this. If you're listening in, if you want to raise healthy kids with a healthy sense of well-being, one of the most important things you can do is identify and resolve conflicts with your spouse completely. Because what often happens is there can be a very strong spouse and the other one tries to accommodate them. There's one person who's conflict avoidant. And what you do when you're conflict avoidant is your kids pick that up, and there's a term called gunny sacking. And gunny sacking means, you're trying to, appease the other person. But what you're doing is you're stuffing down your resentment. And your kids pick this up. And it goes into the fabric of themselves. In fact, it may cause a conflict between their left and right brain, whereas our left and right brain are separate, but they need to work together. There's got to be a marriage between empathy and results, logic and feelings. And when children see unresolved conflicts, and I'll tell you this, when kids get to be teenagers, what I've heard, because I'm retired now, but what they would say is, get divorced. You're so unhappy with each other. I wouldn't be crazy about you getting divorced, but you're so unhappy. And what it is they're feeling that the conflict's not going away, and they can't tune it out. They can't tune out that their parents, I don't know if they love each other, but they certainly don't like each other. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if you're listening in and this hits home, here's a tactic. At least once a month, you have a formal dinner with your spouse. And the purpose of it is, are we on track? Mm-hmm. And one of the ways you can tell if you're on track is, do we each look forward to seeing each other? Mm-hmm. Because if we don't look forward to seeing each other, we have a conflict. You look forward to seeing people you like. And I'm just sharing that because there's so much conflict and there's so much mental health issues. And there's so much where kids don't feel safe. And it's not necessarily brought up in a therapist's office. But what's happening is, children don't feel safe when they come from an unhappy home. And unresolved conflict they can pick up. So I'm just throwing that out. I'm sure it's important.
I think that's a very insightful.
Yeah. And we all have to work on it. I tend to be the more understanding one. I'm the one who lets, my family, I say, oh, they got to get stuff off their chest. I'll be the understanding one. And if I had it to do over again, I'm not saying I wouldn't be understanding, but I was gunny sacking, and yeah. So anyway, I just needed to share that because, as I told you, we were going to have a conversation, and because parenting is so important to you.
Well, let me give you one insight about what I learned about parenting. I think it's incredibly important for you to believe in your kids and to show them that you believe in them, and that if they put their heart and soul into doing whatever they're doing, they'll succeed. I remember I read Don Quixote when I was 10, 11 years old. And it does, in all fairness, I was too young to read that book then. But the book is almost 400 years old, or even more than that. And it's still read today. And then about maybe 10, 15 years ago, I watched Men of La Mancha. Do you remember at first I think it was a musical, and then they made a movie with Peter O'Toole and Sophia Loren. What really shocked me in that musical was when Sophia Loren plays Dulcinea, who's basically she's a prostitute, and Don Quixote treats her like a lady, but a lot more like a lady. He treats her almost as a queen. And he calls her, my queen. And Sophia Loren character, the Dulcinea, she never been treated with kindness and respect, and she never been treated like a lady before. And at first, she thinks this guy is insane. She is. But over time, she starts believing him. She starts believing and she starts seeing herself as he sees her. And that changes her. And I would argue that one of the most important things my parents did for me, they believed in me and they saw in me so much more than I ever deserved, or at least at that point that they had evidence. They believed that I could be so much more than the evidence they saw in front of them at that point in time showed. And I try to do the same thing for my kids. I always bring them up. But again, there is a very important key here, that they have to work for it. They have to put in hard work, and then they'll be successful. And that's something like I mindful of this all the time, and I encourage my kids all the time that they can be successful at anything, and they feel loved, they feel self-confident, and that's been a very kind of that's my parents' advice to the viewers and listeners, I guess.
So is it okay that we're alternating with parenting lessons that we're both learning? Are you all
listen, you are a little bit older than me, so absolutely. I'm looking forward to your parenting lessons. So I'm absolutely.
And these are things that I wish I'd done, and so I'm sharing them so that you and listeners. I'm working with some failure to launch children, mid late 20s, high achieving families. And they can often feel like the parents are controlling. And I've spoken to the parents, and the breakthrough is what I've told these failure to launch kids who are wonderful. They're not, I don't do drugs or, that's a whole other mess. And I said, do you think your parents are disappointed in you?
Mm-hmm.
And they often think, oh, yeah, they're disappointed in me. And I'd say, they're not. They're worried about you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They may be disappointed for you because you're making decisions that they see will hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not disappointed in you. They're worried about you.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a breakthrough because they thought, oh, my parents are disappointed in me. And here's an interesting distinction, which I hope you'll get. It's kind of nuanced. The parents who are disappointed in their children
Mm-hmm.
are often parents who are living through their children too much.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, you think of Tiger Woods' father,
Mm-hmm.
Serena Williams' father, and they saw potential, but their children went through a phase like, I think you're living through me too much.
Mm-hmm.
I feel used by you to get power. I don't feel as supported as you, and then they obviously made peace with them later as they got older.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're listening to this or watching it, this is an important distinction. And if you're a parent, and you might even try this with your children, because I think you can be a loving parent and disappointed for them because they're doing something that could hurt them or backfire. But that's not being disappointed in them because you want them to succeed because you didn't.
Here's a distinction, I think. One is being judged by your parents. Mm-hmm. Another one is you feel like your parents are on your side.
Right.
And they're there with you and they want to help you. So, and that's a tremendous difference.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, and I'd suggest if you have children, and ask them, do you feel like I'm disappointed in you? And if you're more worried than you are disappointed,
mm-hmm.
it's good to make that distinction, because if they feel you're disappointed in them, they won't open up to you. They will lie. And it's going to hurt them. Now, you can also say, well, is it okay to be disappointed in my children if they lie, if they cheat, if they steal?
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand being disappointed in them, but even there, if you really love them, you're disappointed for them, because if the world finds out that they lie, cheat, and steal, the world's not going to tolerate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think this is an important thing, because the people I'm working with, I wouldn't mind that my parents are worried about me. I'm worried about me. I don't know what I want to do. It's okay that they're worried about me. It was liberating to them, because in their mind, my parents are disappointed in me. They're disappointed in me. No. So I just want to share that. It's subtle, but boy, I see all these rebels without a cause.
Mark, those are great insights. So thank you for them.
Yeah. Well, look, you're giving me a chance, and as I told you, I was so inspired by how much parenting means to you. And
I'm just like any parent. I just love my kids.
Mm-hmm. Have you thanked your dad for being a role model on how to love your children?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. Absolutely. My father and I have a very interesting relationship, because my mom passed away when I was very little. That made me appreciate my father so much more, because like when I was 10, 11 years old, you do it kind of instinctively. It's not, you're not thoughtful about this. You just suddenly realize that parents are not forever. And And throughout my life, I always made an effort to spend time with my father. I would go for breakfast to his house. We would go for a walk in the park. We would travel a lot together, just two of us, or sometimes with kids. And it's what made my life so much easier, that my father was just a great person to be around. And so for this reason, so I think many times, because I would argue that he's what I would want to be he's a role model. Look at as a parent. So so I'm very lucky from that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I share another lesson? Is this okay that we're talking like this?
Love it. Keep going. I mean, listen, I'm a student of life, and if I get to learn, this is even better. So,
well, I'm a student of life, and I used to do house calls to dying patients, and I would try to help them make peace with their lives when it was the end. And I remember one that I saw who was just incredibly successful.
mm-hmm.
And when I saw him, I said, and I can be pretty direct, as you know.
Yeah.
And I said to him, you look like crap, and I don't think it's because you're dying. You've been dying as long as I've known you. What's up?
Okay.
That's pretty. That's pretty direct, especially since everyone was afraid of him.
That's right.
And he said, I don't think I've ever done anything important. And I said, you got a hospital named after you. You created all these jobs. At least everyone in the public, thinks you're great. And yeah, I know your private life could be a little bit better, multiple marriages, kids on drugs. And he looked at me and he said, don't con a con man, especially when he's dying. He said, I have all the love that money can buy. And he said, but what I've discovered is everything I thought was important isn't. And everything I thought was unimportant is, and I've run out of time to fix it. You got to listen to these people when you hear this kind of truth.
So I just came from Berkshire Hathaway, and I'm a value investor, so I kind of belong to the church of Warren Buffett. So I go to Berkshire Hathaway meeting every year, and so Warren Buffett said something, and I'm going to read this because it's really stuck with me. He says, I don't know anyone who is kind to die without friends. Okay, I know plenty of people with money to die without friends. Another thing he says, if you want to know how to live your life, write your obituary and then reverse engineer so you can live up to it. So, but I think when he talks about kindness, the key is that money only keeps buying you friends while you have money. But where the kindness has this kind of evergreen quality. So if you're kind to somebody, they'll remember it for the rest of your life. Either you have money or you don't. So anyway, so that's what your anecdote made me think about. Yeah.
So if you have a chance and you're listening in, there's a documentary, I think, on becoming Warren Buffett. I forget what it is.
But I think it's on HBO, right? Is that
yeah. And I'll tell you what blew me away. Because Warren is a little bit on the spectrum. I mean, he's left brain. He's an analytical. He's not necessarily an emotional person. But when I watched that, I said, this is a love story about his former wife who left him and found him his last wife. Because his first wife so wanted to take care of him. And when she was dying, it was really important to find someone to take care of Warren because Warren's like an absent-minded genius. And you can see, I remember he said something like, one of the reasons I gave all the money to Bill and Melinda is, I was good at making money. I didn't know what to do with it. And my former wife was going to be the one who knew what to do with it. I don't know what to do with it. And, but it was so touching, because you could see that the depth of caring that he felt for her and appreciation.
Let me correct you just slightly on this.
Okay, please.
So there was this authorized biography of Warren Buffett called Snowball. It's written by Alice Schroeder, and Alice was a financial analyst, and Warren Buffett really respected her. And he basically said, if you write a book, I'll spend as much time as you want, giving you interviews. I'll talk to all my friends so they can talk to you. So this is probably as the best out of biography on Buffett there is.
Mm.
But when she agreed to do this, she said, I'll write the book I want to write. So, and he was fine with that. And after I read this book, I got a couple of insights about Buffett. So Buffett was obsessed about investing. And when I say obsessed, he had Wall Street Journal delivered to him, late in the evening, not early in the morning, so he could read it before everybody else does. But his kids basically did not see him because he spent all of his time in his study reading. So the problem is this obsession that it came at a cost. So his success today, if you look at his success, it came at tremendous cost because he neglected his kids. His wife, actually, what happened? She left him. So
Right.
no, she left him, and she moved to California with her tennis instructor. But they never got divorced until he never got they just lived separately, but they never got divorced. And you're right about this. His wife, when they lived in separate places, she found this woman that he ended up living with. That's who's his current wife. Reading that book, Snowball, was probably that was probably one of the most important books I ever read. But for very different reasons. What you find, so again, as I mentioned, I'm a value investor. So Warren Buffett is kind of he's the I don't know, if you want to call it the Jesus or the Moses of value investing, right? But then I realized that even that Moses is not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he has a lot of wisdom to share, but at the same time, he's a flawed individual like everybody else. And after reading Snowball, I realized I don't want to be like Warren Buffett. I want to make sure that I spend enough. And luckily, I read this book when my kids were very little, that I realized that I want to spend time with my kids. I don't want to have a regret when I'm older that I didn't spend enough time with my kids. So when I look at Warren Buffett, the guy has a tremendous amount of wisdom to share, but at the same time, I realize that he can, part of his behavior is a behavior of an anti-hero. A person, I will never be as rich as Warren Buffett, nor do I have a desire to be that rich.
Well,
But
yeah, I wasn't proposing him as a hero. You just mentioned
absolutely, no, absolutely,
it was,
no, absolutely, no. I'm not. You didn't. You absolutely didn't. I'm just giving you my observations. By the way, I discussed that in my book. So this is to me, like when you're a value investor, he becomes an automatic hero. Okay, so my point is, there's a lot of wisdom you can learn from him, but also the most important thing I learned from him is to be a better parent. So and also you understand people are complex, and that's nobody's, and there's a interesting Jewish wisdom. I think, I don't know if it's come from Talmud or wherever. And it basically says, when you want something, when you're envious of somebody, when you want something what they have, you want it in entirety. What does it mean? Is that when somebody has a bigger house, and if you say, I wish I had this house, you also have to realize that this person worked 18 hours a day, did not see his kids, had to travel a lot. So if you want this house, you also have to understand the fact that you also means this is what you have to do. You also have to do that. If as I think the chapter in the book called "Go Ahead, Covet Your Neighbor's Wife,"
Mm.
and that was the point of the story, is that if you have if you covet your neighbor's wife, great, but do it in the entirety. Do it, don't just do it for her looks, but also realize she comes with a mother-in-law who every time you see her, she's want to kiss you on the lips. She also comes with the with a brother who has to be bailed out of jail, every other day. So once you start seeing the neighbor's wife in entirety, you realize, okay, maybe I have a good neighbor, but I'm happy with what I got. So and the reason I bring this up, because one of my investment friends asked me if I'd want to have Warren Buffett's success, and I said absolutely not, because the success came at a price that's too high for me.
Yeah, I have a similar story. When I was training to be a psychiatrist, it was long enough ago that they had psychoanalytic institutes. You could be a psychoanalyst.
Mm-hmm.
And I was being courted by the institutes in Los Angeles. And I remember a couple of them saying, if you're a psychiatrist, unless you're in a psychoanalytic institute, unless you become a psychoanalyst, which means you're in analysis 4 days a week and you blah, 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 you're going to be a mediocre psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I didn't become a psychiatrist to worship, being a psychoanalyst. Yes, I would imagine that they're more disciplined than me, and they think at a different level, but I'm not going to sacrifice my life and my family to become a psychoanalyst.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very clubby kind of thing, as probably certain financial circles are,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of do that. I want to leave you with a quote. I collect quotes, and one of my favorite quotes, which I think you'll like, and you're welcome to borrow it. It comes from Milton Greenblatt. He was one of my mentors. He said, "First, we're children to our parents, then parents to our children, then parents to our parents, then children to our children."
Unfortunately,
Well, I'll tell you, I am a child to my children, and they will say, if only you could act less childish, Dad.
so it's actually I'm very lucky that I, even though I'm not supposed to be in the age where I'm a child to my children yet, but I learn so much from my kids.
Totally.
And so which is, you don't expect to be learning from 17-year-olds or 9-year-olds or 22-year-olds, but I am. So it's
Well, it goes back to Nolan Bushnell. If you're listening to this, when your children really feel that you're learning from them,
mm-hmm.
and it's and you're enthusiastic about it, and you ask questions that show that you're truly curious, as opposed to checking a box, it's one of the best things you can do as a parent. Is to be more. One of my mentors, Warren Bennis, he used to say, "Try to be more interested than interesting."
I love that.
It's great. And so with your children, you want to give them guidance, but try to be more interested in them than, you're the only pillar of wisdom that they should listen to. No, they have a lot of wisdom that they don't know they have. Your dad saw things in you that you didn't see.
Absolutely.
He knew it all the time. So where can people find out more about you and the book?
So I'll give you two websites. So when I finished writing the book, I couldn't stop writing the book. So I wrote six new chapters. And if people go to soulinthegame.net, SOUL in the game.net, there are instructions how they can get 6 new chapters I wrote since the book came out. And then if they want to subscribe to my articles or read my articles, they can find me on Substack, or just go to, I'll give you the easiest website, investor.fm, like FM radio, investor.fm. And there they can find my articles and subscribe to my articles.
That's wonderful. I want to thank you for allowing this to be a conversation. It's
Mark, it was a terrific conversation. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Well, I wish you were my dad.
Oh, you're too kind, but thank you. That's probably the kindest thing somebody ever told me.
I'll tell you, if you were my dad, I wouldn't have had to become a psychiatrist to figure out why I'm so screwed up.
Now you changed the way I look at psychologists, period.
There you go. So thank you. This was wonderful. And listeners, please, I can't say enough about Soul in the Game. And I'm guessing that there's going to be many more beyond the 6 additional chapters, because Vitaliy's on a journey. And I think if you're smart, you'll want to stay in touch with his journey, because we'll all be the better for that. So everybody, take care.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark.